Welcome back to Mint Collectibles, everyone. It's your boy, Mint. Today, we are joined by a very special guest. You know him as a writer on Marvel Comics titles such as Spider-Man Life Story, Daredevil, the current X-Men plus Fantastic Four, also for his artwork on Sex Criminals. We have the one and only Chip Zdarsky. Welcome.
How's it going?
It's going good. Thank you so much for agreeing to join us here today.
Oh, thanks for donating.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about that. So this all came about. Chip tweeted he was willing to do podcasts, and I don't know if you agreed to live stream interviews, but somehow we ended up here. But that you would be willing to do this kind of stuff if we donated to the Canadian Comic Relief Fund. You want to explain a little bit what's going on with that?
Maybe you've heard there's a pandemic. Mm-hmm. And comic retailers especially are suffering, obviously, without being able to open their shops or receive new shipments of comics. In the States, they've done some charity work through an organization called BINC, which is for independent bookstores and comic shops. Mm-hmm. But the Canadian retailers have their own thing, and it's organized through the CLLDF. So I think it's CLLDF.com you can go to donate. Normally they're like the CBLDF, like a legal defense fund for Canadian cases, but they're broadening the initiative to incorporate fundraising for the retailers directly. So I've agreed to do a bunch of podcasts. When the podcast donates some money, and here I am.
Are you instantly regretting it?
Oh, no.
You know what? So I was actually just checking up on it, and we just had Humberto Ramos on here on Monday, and I saw he's donating an original piece, I think an Apocalypse that he drew.
Oh, awesome.
So super cool to donate. And actually, people were tagging me in it, and I had just got like YouTube, a direct deposit from YouTube, and I'm like, this is what it's for. You know what I mean? Like, let's keep it moving, and also super awesome to donate to the comic industry in this time. Hopefully we get up out of this soon, and we can get our weekly comics, which is actually how I know you. I'm a big fan of your Daredevil run. I see a lot of people in the chat already saying Daredevil.
Oh, awesome.
A lot of my viewers, like I mentioned off screen, are like omnibus collectors. And I know that's the question I get. Do you think we'll get a Chip Zdarsky Daredevil omnibus?
Daredevil seems to be the kind of title where it really lends itself to the omnibus treatment, because most runs on that book feel like one big self-contained story, which makes it pretty easy to do hardcovers and omnibus style books. So I hope so. I feel like it's a little early. We've done 1 year on the title so far. Yeah,
what is issue? Are you up to issue like 19 or 20 or so? Or
yeah, I mean, issue 19 is out. I've written up to issue 24. So yeah, I mean, hopefully the rest of those issues come out. But yeah, so I had the plan for 1 year. With kind of a growing story moving into the second year. So really, we've only been doing this for a year and a bit.
I do weekly comic book day reviews, and I was doing the Daredevil, and I think the only complaint I had was this needs to come out bi-weekly. It was once a month for like a while, and I was saying that in my reviews, and the people let me know, hey, dude, this is about to be bi-weekly, and sure enough, it is, and it feels like the perfect pace for this story.
Yeah, I think it works out to be like 16 issues a year. So it's not quite like monthly, bi-weekly. I think Marvel just kind of figures out how far ahead you can get on a title, and which months can accommodate extra issues, because that's part of it too. You don't want to flood the stands with content. So yeah, I was really looking forward to issue 20, because it was like the end of our arc, kind of hitting directly after 19. But now it's just sitting there in a warehouse somewhere.
Yeah, and I'll talk about your other series that's ongoing right now that left us on a cliffhanger. But real quick on Daredevil, what was really intriguing about Daredevil is like his relationship with the mob boss wife. Like, how many superheroes are in a relationship like in an affair? I thought that was like super like real, and set him apart from like your Captain Americas or some other superheroes that would never do that.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of Daredevil as a character and as a title, because it feels like it's a little bit removed from the Marvel universe. So you can kind of go a bit deeper, maybe a bit darker, more realistic with the character. That's always been the beauty of that title to me. And so being able to kind of shift over from doing like Spider-Man or Fantastic Four, which, I'm not going to have Peter Parker cheat on anyone or,
Right.
Mr. Fantastic.
It just works for Daredevil.
Yeah, it does, because he's kind of the most human of the superheroes in a lot of ways, and the most adult. Like, he's got a real job, lawyer, or in my run, probation officer. He's super powered, but not crazy super powered. Like,
he could blend in, right? Basically.
Yeah, like his abilities are basically like a normal human, like kind of like a Batman style character,
for sure.
Except for the heightened senses, and so you can get away with a lot more with Daredevil, and I knew that going in, which is kind of why I kind of leaned a bit more into dealing with issues that maybe I couldn't have dealt with doing Spectacular Spider-Man or Marvel 2-in-1.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely more of your street level kind of hero, more gritty, and he even does like break ethics with his job as a lawyer, using his senses and stuff. So he's already kind of walking that line, if you think about it, right? Yeah,
he's got a weird dichotomy there between lawyer and vigilante, which is super interesting, and it plays into the other side of him, which is his religion, because he's a religious man, he's Catholic, but he's also dressed as the devil, going out and beating people up. Like, it's trying to find where those things cross over and where they touch, and what becomes the central core to the character.
Yeah, he's definitely always struggling with that. He's questioning his faith and his religious, and should he be doing these things, and ethically at the same time. It's like a constant struggle with everything.
Yeah, and like the Bible is open to interpretation. At several points during the storyline, we touch upon that. There's Old Testament versus New Testament. Turn the other cheek, or eye for an eye, right?
For sure.
That's the other interesting thing about Daredevil is his religion. In Marvel Comics, they've touched upon the religions of characters before, but you don't go as deep as you do with a character like Daredevil.
Yeah, it feels very real. Do you think about like the predecessors when you jump into Daredevil? Do you think about Frank Miller or Brubaker or Bendis or any of these guys, Wade?
Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing with this book. So before this, I was doing Howard the Duck and Star-Lord and Spectacular Spider-Man, and none of that intimidated me, really. Howard the Duck a little bit, because he was very associated with a single creator. But Daredevil as a title is intimidating, because the runs on it are either legendary or forgettable. And, you bring up, Bendis, Brubaker. For me, when I was younger, Ann Nocenti and John Romita Jr. on that title was like the top level of comics. So, especially rereading all of that, leading into working on the title, you definitely have the thing in the back of your head, like, oh, you're going to fuck this up, man.
Right? Yeah, don't fuck it up.
Yeah. So there's...
Well, you're not.
There was more pressure on this title than there has been or probably will ever be with any other title, because of the single focus of it. Like, there's no Daredevil offshoot books, right? It's Daredevil. It's like very much a prestige single title.
Yeah, and you're right. Like, every creator can kind of jump on and kind of like reboot it with like a soft reboot in a sense. Awesome. Yeah, and you mentioned stuff like Howard the Duck, Spectacular Spider-Man. A lot of people in the comments asking about Spider-Man Life Story.
Yeah.
Spider-Man Life Story threw me off, because it's a book that I didn't read in singles, and everyone knows I'm a big Spidey guy.
Yeah.
They're saying, Jim, you got to read Life Story. You got to read it. And when I read it, I wasn't ready. Like, I didn't expect the big canon changes that you did. I thought it was just going to be like, oh, what would it be like if he grew up through the eras? But it's kind of it changed a lot more than I thought. Can you go into like your thought process when you decided to write Life Story?
Yeah. So with Life Story, before you go into a project like that, you kind of have to establish rules for it, just so you can stay on track. And so my idea was, I wanted to make sure, even though I aged the character in real time, I still wanted to touch upon the major storylines over the decades. And to be able to do that in a way where it pays, it's like an homage to those storylines, but they all have a twist to them. They all change due to the nature of him aging in real time. Like a Peter Parker dealing with the situation at 50 is different than a Peter Parker dealing with it as a 20-year-old.
Yeah, and I guess you got to make it different from everything else, and you get free reign to kind of do whatever you want with like kind of self-contained story like this.
Yeah. Like I pitched it initially as a large Marvel Universe book, like a 12-issue kind of maxi series, but the editor wisely told me to focus on Spider-Man. That's kind of the main character, and that made a lot of sense. And also it was so, like, I'm very lucky they gave me 30 pages per issue, because there were so many Spider-Man moments I needed to get into each issue, which covers a decade,
for sure,
and to find ways to weave them in so they didn't feel too jarring.
So not to give any spoilers or anything, but so many people commented this that they cried at the end, that it was so powerful at the end there.
Yeah, I mean, I felt bad working on it because the thing with Spider-Man, the thing with Peter Parker is when he succeeds, he fails. Like that's kind of integral to the character. There's kind of an unwritten rule in the books for a Spider-Man writer, which is if Spider-Man is doing well, Peter Parker isn't doing well. Peter Parker is doing well, Spider-Man isn't doing well.
Makes sense.
So he always has to like have a bit of a reset as you go along, where you think he's going to do great and then he fucks up. And so
that Parker luck.
It's the Parker luck, and to have that span decades, I put a lot on the character. Like, he had a lot of losses as the series goes through, which is inevitable when you deal with all these major storylines, because during those storylines he usually has losses.
Yeah, for sure.
So I really wanted to, towards the end, have him recognize that it's okay, because the theme of the character and the theme throughout the story is his overwhelming responsibility. To the point where Mary Jane leaves him at one point with the kids because he doesn't make that choice. And so towards the end, I wanted, through his dream that he relays to Mary Jane, and through his kind of encounter with her in his mind in his final moments, that is okay to let go. That he actually did it. He made up for all those years ago when he didn't stop Uncle Ben's killer. Like, he has a dream where, like, for the first time in his life, that dream ended positively, which felt like a nice kind of way to wrap that story up. It was a huge challenging book to work on, because I had to figure out like several types of timelines. Like I had one timeline marking the ages of the characters based on their first appearances.
Right.
So so Miles, based on his first appearance and how old he was there, how old he would be in 2019. So there's a whole timeline to keep track of there, and then a timeline of real world events and how they might change or reflect things differently. And then the third timeline of all the events as they happen within the Spider-Man titles.
The big question that I got after talking about this book was, are there plans for a life story for other characters?
I talked to the editors at Marvel about it, because it did well. People seem to like it, and of course the instinct is to do more of them. I personally can't do it, just because it was such a huge, wild project that
it seems like it took a lot out of you to get through that.
Yeah, and like one of the blessings and the curses was being paired with Mark Bagley on it, who's a legendary Spider-Man artist, but he's so fucking fast, and so and he was working even faster on this than normal because he felt like he was a little behind under 30-page issues by the time he came aboard. So like 2 pages of pencils were coming in every day, and I'm still plotting out the rest of the series. I'm just like, oh fuck, this is too much. It's too much.
No, it was definitely critically acclaimed. Like, everybody loved it. It threw me off. I wasn't ready, but like I said, everybody seems to love that book. And some characters, I don't think it'll work. Like, I'm looking in the comments and I'm seeing like Wolverine life story, or I'm thinking Cap life story, but they don't really age the same way that Spider-Man does, right?
Well, it's interesting they mentioned Wolverine, because when I originally pitched it as a Marvel Universe book, the kind of the characters who you watch the world through their eyes was Wolverine and Mr. Fantastic. Like I wanted Mr. Fantastic to kind of be the character that you follow who ages, and I want Wolverine to be the character you follow who doesn't age, who sees everyone age around him. There are, I think there's tons of possibilities for more life stories.
For sure.
But you know, I told him, like, I want to read them as a fan. Like, I would love to see top Marvel creators take a stab at these characters and see what they do with it. The big question, of course, is, do they take place in the same universe?
Right.
Spider-Man life story, or do they get to chart their own course? So there's pluses and negatives to both of those ideas. You know, the big plus is, oh, you've got a self-contained universe, so you get to see things that happen in between the panels of the Spider-Man life story.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it's very hindering for any writer or artist coming in, because all of a sudden they have to follow all kind of the world events in the Civil War and stuff that I laid out in the Spider-Man book. And then on top of that, they have to follow the designs that Mark did, you know, at different stages for the non-Spider-Man characters. Yeah. So it can be a little limiting.
Because you had Reed, Mr. Fantastic was in that book, and
Tony Stark, and then, you know, he redesigned, you know, armors for various characters in the Civil War era. So it's a big question. Like, I have no doubt there will be more. I haven't been notified. I told them I'd love to do the covers, because I got to do the covers for Life Story,
right?
And that was a lot of fun. So I'd love to do that again.
Yeah, and doing the covers. So like you're a double threat here, right? With as a writer and as an artist, you do the art on Sex Criminals, correct?
Yeah. And I've done a few things for Marvel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like I did. I wrote and drew and illustrated an issue of Spectacular Spider-Man, cool. My final issue. And I did the backup in Daredevil issue 1, the one without text. So Sex Criminals is kind of my main job. That's the one that, you know, takes 8 hours a day, every day to draw. It's going to be wrapping up soon, but yeah.
I wish I could speak more. I haven't read Sex Criminals, man. I have all the books, and I read as much as I can, and I'm like, dang. And I've heard of such great things for a long time. It's been running since when? Was it 2013 or?
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, it's been a while.
It's been a little bit.
I mean, it takes a long time to make, so
so it seems longer. Or?
I will say, if you're a hardcover,
they have deluxe editions, right?
Yeah, they're called Big Hard Sex Criminals.
That's right.
And I'm quite pleased with them. The nice thing about working for Image is you get really hands-on with the packaging and design of it all. So I got to design, you know, the slip cover and all the elements in the hardcover.
Oh, cool!
Which is a ton of fun.
I like Matt Fraction a lot too, man. So I got to check out Sex Criminals. What I do want to talk about, we mentioned that Daredevil kind of left us on a cliffhanger. The end of the arc is issue 20. Let's talk Fantastic Four and X-Men.
Yeah.
So it's a 4-issue series, and just 3 issues came out, so we're waiting on that 4th.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, do you feel that the mutants are being too strict with their everyone's got to live on Krakoa type of thing, or is it warranted based on Moira's 10 lives or 9 lives saying that it ends bad every time?
I mean, the mutants all have a choice, so it's not like an edict, like you have to live on this island. It's the fact that the mutants are gravitating towards it. Comics is an interesting thing, especially in a shared universe that takes place over so many decades, because Genosha, you know, all the mutants were wiped out. It was like millions of mutants were wiped out during that event.
Right, House of M.
Yeah. So if something like that happened, or before, or not House of M, but like in Grant Morrison's X-Men run, like
New X-Men, yeah.
Yeah, and if anything like that happened in reality, like, and the history of mutants in the Marvel Universe, like, yeah, fuck, of course they're gonna just fucking get their own island and nation and arm themselves to the teeth. Like,
right?
It's a dangerous world for mutants in the Marvel Universe.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, I mean, I love the relaunch.
Yeah,
I think what Hickman and all of his stable of writers and artists have done is fascinating, and it goes beyond kind of the standard superhero comics.
Yeah, I love the new foundation that Hickman set. Did you have to work with him on this miniseries? I'm sure there had to be some kind of run this by him type of stuff.
Yeah. So when I conceived of it, it's a Fantastic Four book because it falls within their office. And so I had to run everything by Dan Slott, who's writing FF, and everything by Hickman, who's doing X-Men, and the various editors. So that was tricky. Though funny enough, like the notes that came back were Hickman's notes were about the Fantastic Four more than the X-Men, because he wrote them for so long. Like he knows those characters better than anyone. So he was super helpful in the development of it. But yeah, because it's just outside the X-Men office, I'm kind of like the bastard stepchild X-Men book. I'm allowed in the X-Men Slack to discuss what's happening in X-Men, like the message boards, but I'm not quite part of the team.
Yeah, because it's like, is it a Dawn of X title? I mean, it has Krakoa, it has what's going on in that.
And it will, by the end of issue 4, it will 100% affect the X-Men books and the Fantastic Four books.
Right.
So yeah, it's funny. Like I don't even know how it's going to get collected. I don't know if it's going to be collected as Fantastic Four book or get wrapped up in the Dawn of X stuff or what.
And they're actually collecting those Dawn of X titles in 2 formats as it is with the trades.
I know. Yeah, the chronological and yeah. Leave it to Hickman to come up with some complicated fucking math.
Yeah, exactly. He's always the plotter, right? The long game with Hickman that pays off. So I mean, I'm down for the ride. Any characters that you want to take on that you haven't had the chance to yet? Is there any kind of like dream project that you haven't done?
No, not really. I feel like I know most comic writers have their list of characters, and a lot of them have like kind of books of ideas off to the side that they thought of for years. But I've never had that really. Partly because I ended up kind of coming to comics as a career a little bit later. I worked in newspapers for 13 years and just did my own comics on the side. And when Sex Criminals came out, that's when Marvel approached me to pitch stuff. I'm like, oh, yeah, no, I've been reading comics all my life. I'd love to. And so it was a very new thing to me, like starting off with Howard the Duck. And I threw Spider-Man in issue 1 just so I could like check that off a bucket list. I'm like, oh, yeah, that's kind of the big one, right? Like, I want to write some Spider-Man dialogue. Yeah,
once you do Spider-Man, it's like you're already at like the top, right?
Yeah, and like when I got my own Spider-Man title, I was like, well, that was super cool, but I like to tackle books where when an editor asks me, hey, do you want to write this character or this title? I have to stop, think about it, research, and figure out if I have a story worth telling.
Right.
Like that's the moment when I really want to put in the effort into thinking about it, and I don't rely on my notebook from when I was in high school, what I wanted Spider-Man or Wolverine to do, because frankly those ideas probably don't work.
Right.
So I really want to tailor it towards whether or not it's going to be a good story, and if I can come up with a good story. I've turned down a lot of titles over the years.
Any regrets on turning any of those down?
No. I mean, sometimes the titles that come out instead are much better than anything I would have come up with, or sometimes they're not, and it's just like, well, you kind of dodge a bullet either way, right?
Right.
But I turned down the titles not because I'm like, oh, this won't advance my career. I turned them down because, I don't think I have a story for this.
I got you.
Or a good enough story to put that time and effort into it. And you don't want to cheat the readers. You don't want to be like, it'd be a real stepping stone for me to, write this book of, Captain Carrot or whatever.
It's not the right reasons, right?
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, it's kind of like getting promoted. Like when you work in an environment like an office or something, and somebody goes, you've been doing a good job doing X. We want to promote you to do Y. People usually just take that job,
right?
Without actually thinking like, oh, do I want to do that job? Right. Am I the right person for that job? And so you end up with a lot of people in bad situations where they're making more money or have more prestige, but they're not in the job that's for them, really. And so I translate that to comics as often as I can to make sure what I'm doing is worth my time, worth the reader's time, and is something I enjoy.
A lot of people in the comments are asking about DC Comics.
I don't know who they are.
Okay, so strictly Marvel fan for now. Okay.
No. I mean, I've got a lot of friends at DC, and I read DC books. I like the friendly rivalry between Marvel and DC.
Sure.
So yeah.
Got to have competition. Yeah. You mentioned you were working at you were a writer at, it was a newspaper, right?
Yeah.
So when you do Sex Criminals, you decide I'm going to go by Chip Zdarsky.
Yeah. So the Chip stuff happened a long time ago, like in 2000, because I was working for the newspapers. I was working for the two kind of main newspapers in Canada. It was like the National Post and the Globe and Mail. Mm-hmm. As a freelancer, and I kind of ran afoul of one of the editors. Like I kind of did a thing in this paper that kind of trashed that paper, and I felt bad, and I got a lot of shit for it. And and so I told her, I'm like, if I ever do anything that could reflect poorly on the paper, I'll do it under a pseudonym.
Oh, okay.
And so at the time, I was also doing a comic strip for a university newspaper. Mm-hmm. It was a dark college strip, Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, this might be a bit too much, so I should do it under a pen name. So I just came up with the pen name.
I had no idea that Chip Zdarsky was just a pen name.
yeah, and like I had some fun with it. Like I interviewed my pen name at one point in the university paper, and but I did these like little comics, and I really had a lot of fun doing them. And a friend of mine, Kagan McLeod, he did a book called Infinite Kung Fu. And he was doing his series, and he kind of like convinced me to print my comics. So I went through the steps and, found a printer, submitted them to Diamond, and next thing you knew, I had a collection of them. And so Kagan and myself would go to conventions, and I just did them as this character, Chip Zdarsky, which was like, I had a cowboy hat and like fake glasses, and, it wasn't really me. Right.
Right.
And, but I had a lot of fun doing it. And as time went on, I just kind of did more and more comics for myself. And I met Matt Fraction as Chip, and we became friends. Like, because that's not his real name either. Like, that's the funny thing. Like, we both have, no one has a last name Fraction.
I guess, yeah. Wow. So, not many people know, but GemMint is not my real name either.
Whoa, it's wild. So yeah, we're both middle-aged dudes with pseudonyms, and we were friends, and we started doing Sex Criminals together. And so at that point, like, I was working full time at the newspaper as a writer and an artist, and I tried to do both for a year, and then I had to quit the newspaper gig.
Did you think comics would be your main gig, or was it was just like something that you were doing on the side, right? Or...
Yeah, I just did it for fun. Like,
that's cool, man.
Every few years, I put out a new comic. Maybe I'd do some shows. I would do some online, and it was just a ton of fun. And Matt and I did a music video for a friend, and that worked really well. And he was kind of winding down at Marvel, and I was getting a little bored at the newspaper, and that's how Sex Criminals happened. Mm-hmm. But we thought it would only last like 3 issues because it's such a stupid idea. And we didn't think anyone would want to read it. And the first year it came out, it just kind of exploded. And
yeah, it was big when it first came, right? And still ongoing.
Yeah, and so it became like a second job because it lasted.
I like the thought process. Like, I don't want to really mess up my real job, so I'm just going to go by this name and try to see what happens over here.
I highly recommend it to anyone. Like, if you're going to be a writer or an artist, like, make up a name. Like, it's a ton of fun.
That actually answers a question in the chat. What advice do you have for aspiring artist or writer? Boom, make a fake name.
Yeah. I mean, like, if I could do it all over again, I'd probably pick a better name. But, at the time, I was just making it up for goofs and fun. But if I could be like Max Danger or something, or GemMint.
Max Power.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Be something distinctive, stand out.
Chip Zdarsky, that stood out to me right away. Like I never forgot it from the first time I saw it. I think Daredevil was the first thing I read of yours, and then and then I was like, wow, that stuck out. Ricto sent $20 Canadian super chat. He's asking Chip, have there been any WEF reunions? Can you tell us about that time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is the really interesting thing where in like 2000, just before 2000, Warren Ellis, the comic writer, started an online forum called the Warren Ellis Forum, obviously. And it was kind of the first place online where comic creators and fans congregated. Like we all kind of came together and interacted on this message board that Warren kind of ruled with an iron fist. Like if you stepped out of line, like he'd boot you right away.
That's it.
Like I think I got a 2-week suspension within like 3 days of being there. And the interesting thing is, at the time, you could see these fans who kind of wanted to be comic writers or artists, and you could kind of tell which ones were going to be something. So Matt Fraction, that was his kind of first thing, was being on there. He met his wife, Kelly Sue DeConnick, there.
There you go.
Who obviously went on to huge acclaim, and Sam Humphries, Jamie McKelvey, Kieran Gillen, like all these kind of like low level kind of independent writers and artists. We all kind of found each other there, and now we all work for Marvel, DC, Image.
That's
so
awesome, man.
It's amazing, and in terms of like a reunion or whatever, there's a core of us that kind of like kept up after that. Like we'd have our own little private message boards, and now we have like our Slacks and things. So we still kind of check in with each other every once in a while, which is kind of cool, especially considering, where we started.
That's awesome. Don't tell me that's not Warren Ellis's real name.
Yeah. Well, wait a second. That fucker.
We got a super chat from Hidden Gem Comics, $2 super chat. He's asking you, did you enjoy writing Marvel 2-in-1? What was your experience with that?
It was huge. I was a big Fantastic Four reader.
Awesome.
And this is during the period where there was no Fantastic Four.
Right.
And the comic had been gone for a couple of years at that point, I think. And the editor emailed me one day with just like an image he just kind of like put together, which was a close-up of the Thing's midsection with a 2 on his belt instead of a 4.
Oh, wow.
And that's all he did. He just sent that to me, and I'm like, what's going on here? Like, I kind of freaked out because he's offering me the Thing to write. And he's like, yeah, we're going to bring back Marvel 2-in-1. We want a book about Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm. And I was like, oh, this is everything to me. And he's like, awesome. You can use all the, the FF villains and stuff. Like, it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, they have a huge history. Their cosmic, they created the cosmic Marvel, right? And a lot of people are already going off. Take over Fantastic Four, please. When are you going to go back to Fantastic Four? And
I love that book so much. And like, our first artist out of the gate too is Jim Chung, who just beautiful work, absolutely stunning. Actually, hold on 1 second, just a second.
Yeah, sure. Guys in the chat, if you guys want to get any questions in, let's go ahead and get them in now. We'll probably wrap up here in less than 30.
Sorry.
No worries.
So this is, Jim sent me a page from Marvel 2-in-1. This is issue 6. And it's just gorgeous.
Wow.
Like, look at all that beautiful, beautiful detail and that kind of like that Kirby tech. Oh, nice. It's just gorgeous. And he like pencils on the back and like light boxes it. So you kind of get both. It's super cool. I love that title so much. And getting to write those characters was a dream. And also at the time, Dr. Doom was infamous Iron Man. Like Bendis had kind of like turned him into a hero. So I got to write him as kind of like this really fucking snotty hero. And it was so fun. And like, we got 12 issues out of it, which felt like a pretty decent run. Like when they announced they were bringing back Fantastic Four and Dan Slott was going to be writing it, I coordinated a lot with him in that office. And there was talks about continuing Marvel 2-in-1, but I was like, I don't think we need 2 Fantastic Four books. Like, I'd rather just step back and let Dan just like do his thing, which has been awesome. And yeah, getting to do Fantastic Four X-Men is a direct result of that because they were like, we want you to do more FF content. And so I kind of went away and thought about it. And then when I thought about the Franklin Richards of it all, I pitched FF X-Men.
Yeah, and you mentioned being a fan of comics or liking to read comics, and you mentioned being a big fan of Marvel 2-in-1. Anthony Garcia is asking, what's Chip's top 5 comic runs? Can you think like all time? What's your go-to?
Oh, that's a real hard one.
Yeah, it's tough.
You can easily fill that top 5 with just Daredevil runs, really. Yeah. But I mentioned before, Ann Nocenti, John Romita Jr., the Daredevil run, around like 250 and on, is just stellar comic book work. It's really, really wild and out there, and it's got so many interesting themes about like fragile male ego and femininity and Catholicism. I think it's John Romita Jr.'s best work. He's got an amazing inker on that. Al Williamson, a classic. It's beautiful comics work, and really, really interesting. Every issue is interesting. Over on the Fantastic Four side, my favorite run is probably Walt Simonson, when he was writing and drawing it, because it's just wild comics. Like it's like they're on a time sled and like fighting dinosaurs and a robotic Stalin, and there's so many crazy ideas in that short run. I could read and reread those forever. I also really love Wade and Waringo on FF. I thought that was just beautiful comics making. Yeah,
that was a fun run too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I gravitate mostly towards like stories. Like Daredevil Born Again is the best book Marvel's ever put out, probably. Like it's such a perfect distillation of that character, and so revolutionary for the time. And David Mazzucchelli came into his own on that book. And then Batman Year One, like they immediately went over there and did that, which is probably my second favorite superhero book. Like there's never been a better pairing than those two.
So I have a good question here from our viewer, Sandwichism. What's Chip's next big goal in the comics industry? Is there one?
Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before, that I don't really have goals. The goal is to tell good stories, right?
Gotcha.
So if the opportunity presents itself to tell a good story, then I'll jump at it. Right now, before kind of the pandemic struck, I had like maybe 3 or 4 kind of creator-owned books that were ramping up, with issue 1s kind of underway, being drawn, and that has kind of curtailed that a little bit. So really, my only goal right now is, besides just writing and drawing stories that I enjoy, is to help kind of usher those through to the other end of this and make sure they actually get out so people can see the art that's being produced.
So being a big like Fantastic Four fan, are you a big like MCU fan? Are you into the movies?
Oh yeah, no, I've seen them all.
So being that you're such a FF fan, like what do you envision for their debut in the MCU?
I don't know. FF's a real tricky one.
Yeah.
I forget. Maybe it was a friend of mine that years ago said that the FF probably worked best if you treated it as a period piece. Like if you treat it as like a 1960s swinging 60s, the Fantastic Four is kind of like the first kind of movie star type heroes on the scene.
Right.
I don't think that quite works with the MCU. So MCU obviously kind of gravitates more towards kind of making them more realistic.
Yeah, it's going to be tough for Fantastic Four and X-Men, especially with having already established movies in the past. And like, are we doing Doom again or?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I think it's easier with X-Men because there's so much to play with, and there's a very easy entry point to X-Men. Whereas Fantastic Four, there isn't. Like stretchy guy is a hard visual to sell in film, and just the idea of them Baxter building and being these kind of like stars, really.
Yeah.
That's a hard one, I think, to pull off. So I'm as curious as anyone else is to see how and if they'll do it.
For sure. All right, we've got a quick super chat from Hidden Gem Comics, $2 super chat asking, would you ever consider writing for Hulk?
Well, I mean, it would be really hard to pass to to take that over after what Al Ewing's done.
Yeah, Immortal Hulk. They kind of really set the new standard for Hulk with that.
Yeah, they really did. I think everyone who ever had like a Hulk idea, just kind of threw it out the window after Al's run took off.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I would never say no outright to anything. Again, it depends on the idea that I have. I did Star-Lord briefly, right. And I'd never considered Star-Lord as a title that I would do. But when they offered it to me and I thought about it, I'm like, oh, here's a story. And it felt like, it felt right. If it feels right, I'll do it.
Yeah, you have something for it, so you went with it. Bruce Johannes, $5 super chat. Thank you, Bruce. He's asking Chip, what about a Daredevil and Spider-Man team up miniseries?
That's funny because the main artist on Daredevil, Marco, he loves Spider-Man. It's his favorite character next to Daredevil, and so for him, I always keep putting Spider-Man into the book.
Yeah, right.
So he keeps kind of popping up whenever Marco is drawing it. So Daredevil's kind of turning into a bit of a Daredevil Spider-Man miniseries.
Yeah, right. Spider-Man's always popping in like, is everything okay over here? I'm going to have to like rope you in here.
Yeah, exactly. So Spider-Man reappears post issue 20, and there's some cool kind of showdowns coming.
All right, we'll wind it down here. I don't want to take too much of your time problem. Here. I mean, I know no one has anywhere to go, but
that's true.
That's kind of how I want to end it. Like, how are you spending your time during this quarantine? You're in Canada, right?
Yeah.
Quarantine there as well?
Yeah. First week, I was kind of, not to brag, I was a bit of ahead of the curve on this quarantining thing. I was quarantining about a week before people started quarantining. Just because I've got pretty shitty lungs, and we have relatives in China who are kind of like giving us a lot of updates on how things are going there. So As soon as it touched down here, my wife and I were like, all right, let's bunker down. The big thing was, trying to convince my parents to cut their Florida stay short.
Yeah.
As they were living in a seniors trailer park in Florida, which seemed to me to be not the optimal place to be in a pandemic. So got them to drive back to Canada, and I don't know. Like the first week where everything kind of like went to shit was pretty rough because I had to write some stuff that was like kind of light and fun. And talking to other comic writers, it's really hard to write at this moment. To kind of tune out the world and just focus on this fantasy world where people are outside and interacting with each other. Yeah, feels really weird. I've had a few kind of drawing jobs come up, which has been super helpful, like besides Sex Criminals, because I find it easier to kind of focus on drawing.
It's pretty cool that you get decisions. You could bounce back and forth between those two things, and maybe if you get burned out writing, you could draw. And it's also why I like having multiple writing projects on the go, because you can switch genres and tones. If you're not feeling like being funny one day, you can go write something darker, and vice versa. Awesome, man. Well, again, I really appreciate you coming on the show with us here, doing it live. Could have been anything going on. No, I appreciate you donating and your time. Yeah, for sure. If anybody wants to help out the Canadian Comics Fund, you could find on Chip's Twitter. He's been promoting it, and I think you could find it. The website's kind of confusing. What is it? CLL? It's CLLDF. I think it's .com. Let me just double check. Yeah, if you're able to, some of us working from home, and I think as comic artists, writers, and readers, I think a lot of us self-quarantine on the regular as it is, right? We're kind of, I'm always spending time in here as it is. So awesome, man. I thank you so much. Thank you for everybody watching in the live chat here, all the members who shot us donations. If you're not subscribed to the channel, and if you're watching on the replay, leave a comment below. But thanks everyone for watching. Yeah, thanks everyone. Peace. Thanks, Gem Mint. Thank you.